you go to the macro world, where definitely quantum mechanics is applicable, but it's not appreciable. It's not appreciable in our day-to-day life. But as you have heard, that the universe came out of nothing, and we have to think of the subatomic domain. So definitely quantum physics has a tremendous role to play, in fact also in the understanding of Higgs boson. I'll request all of you to go through a particular text by George Gamow, the 30 years that shook physics. It tells about basically the two iconoclasts in the physics, that is relativity and quantum mechanics, and most of it happened during 1900 to 1930. And George Gamow had the knack of writing very serious things and less serious things almost in the same tone. And if you can grab a copy of that book, it would be extremely interesting reading. Now, Professor Mukherjee has explained, he was talking about the trajectory. In the classical domain, you can explain the trajectory from the laws of motion in mechanics. Whereas, describing the trajectory of a subatomic particle like electron, well, that is not tenable. I was talking about this book, and that is George Gamow on your screen. So these were the shakers. There were many other shakers, and definitely the central figure, I have not named him. He knows and doesn't need any introduction, the man of the century. And then it's not that they were the only shakers. There were many, but I have shortlisted Max Planck, Louis de Broglie, Niels Bohr. That was the early stages, and it got a formal shape through Schrödinger's wave mechanics, Heisenberg's matrix mechanics, and Dirac formalism. So let us go a little bit into them. See, Max Planck, while studying the black body radiation, basically to explain the nature of black body radiation and its departure from the classical explanation, had proposed the emission of energy in the form of quanta. That is, every quantum of photon is called a wave packet, and it carries an energy h times nu, where nu is the frequency of radiation, and h is called Planck's constant, 6.634 into 10 to the power of minus 34 joules second. An extremely small quantity, to describe, and it's linked with the micro world. And I was talking about the two iconoclasts in the history of physics, quantum mechanics, where the most significant constant is h, and relativity, where the most significant constant is c, the velocity of light, 3 into 10 to the power of 8 meters per second. So that's again a massive quantity. And another interesting thing, Planck's constant has its dimension energy by time. Energy by time, that is, energy is, if you know about kinetic energy, let us try with that, mass into length square divided by time square. So that again gets multiplied by time. So mass into length square into time. And c is length divided by time. So it is energy per time, energy into time, and length divided by time. So it is energy into length. Now why I am saying so, energy can be expressed in electron volt, and length can be expressed in angstrom. 10 to the power of 8 angstrom is equal to 1 centimeter. So if you express h into c in electron volt angstrom, please don't accept what I am saying. Please do this calculation back home. It comes to about 12345 electron volt angstrom. The exact value comes to 12413, but it can be approximated as 12345. I thought that I'll share that. Now, see, in Bohr model of atom, it has already been explained by Professor Mukherjee that he wanted to standardize the orbits, because if the electron is moving in the orbit in that fashion, it would be radiating energy as per the laws of electromagnetism, and it would be falling into the nucleus, really leading to the collapse of the atom. So what happens? So they are moving in orbits, and the orbits are standardized by the phenomenal mechanical quantity called angular momentum. It's like the planetary motion. They are moving under the influence of what is called a central force. Like gravitation is a central force, there the force involved is a Coulomb force. Both are inverse square and central, that is, it acts along a particular direction, and under such a situation, something called torque, which is a rotational analog of force, is 0. And if the torque is 0, angular momentum is conserved. So in order to standardize the orbit, Bohr had to choose a quantity which is conserved, and he chose angular momentum. One reason being that, and another is what I call the gift of nature. Little while ago I talked about h, the Planck's constant, and he had to standardize the orbits, he had to involve h, because in the classical domain, in the classical world, we cannot appreciate this discreteness of the orbits. And so that we cannot appreciate is because of the smallness of h, so h should be involved. And what is that gift of nature? That the dimension of h, or let me use a simpler term, the unit of h and unit of angular momentum are one and the same. It's a great gift of nature, otherwise this equation could not have been written. If you have to make an equation qualify, the left hand side and right hand side, it's a very basic thing, should have the same dimension. 1 rupee cannot be equal to 1 kilometer. So on the two sides of equality, you should have quantities having same dimension, and that was the intuition of Bohr. See, Bohr also, making a digression, Bohr also intuitively said, he was the first vice president of Denmark football team, Denmark Football Association, and he said that Denmark will rule the football world once. It was going to happen in 1986, it didn't happen. So it was Bohr's intuition that he chose angular momentum. And then when de Broglie came into the picture, the concept of matter wave, that is electron endowed with the property of mass and charge, which is so much physical, which is so much measurable. When you see the cathode ray tube, the veins moving, it's due to the momentum imparted by the electron. So it has a mass, and as Professor Mukherjee has mentioned, that under the influence of a magnetic field or an electric field, it deflects, so it has a charge. But it also behaves as a wave. The first experiment was done by Davison and Jarmer, and then of course by G.P. Thomson. So that particle is endowed with both the quality, it a particle behavior and as well as a wave behavior. Like Kapil Dev, an all-rounder, in 1983 when he plays that innings of 175 not out against Zimbabwe, so then he comes as a batsman, his bowling capability remains suppressed. And in Benson and Hedges final, when he takes 3 initial wickets of Pakistan and lays the foundation of India's victory, so his batting capability remains suppressed and he is a bowler. So the same thing happens with matter wave. It is behaving as a particle. It's not like it behaves as a particle on Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays and wave as on Thursdays, Fridays and Saturdays, but both the properties are there. And this matter wave had to be accommodated in that orbit, and that brings in a new constant in physics, h by 2 pi. H by 2 pi, because the circumference 2 pi r is accommodated by n number of de Broglie waves, which is h by mv. So this is a new vision about the existence, that is you have a dual existence, both particle as well as wave. And then the fountainhead of quantum mechanics, which I at least call it the fountainhead of quantum mechanics, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Now here, when some people tend to be philosophical, says that life is uncertain, it is also said in physics, it's not like that. And this uncertainty has got nothing to do with accuracy or inaccuracy, it is indeterminism. That is, it is a failure to measure position and velocity, which was so crucial. See, classically, if you start with any equation of motion, I am talking a little bit of mathematics, it has to be a second order differential equation, because mass, force is equal to mass into acceleration, and acceleration is mathematically d2x dt2. It essentially has to be a second order differential equation. After first integration you get velocity, after second integration you get space. So it is a matter of measuring position and velocity. How does momentum chips in? By multiplication of mass, because you have to relate with h. So this combination, this product, momentum and position, is called action, which is the same dimension as that of angular momentum. And what happens in linear motion with linear position and linear momentum happens with angular position and angular momentum in the case of rotational motion. And you have to slightly digress and think about uncertainty in time in the form of lifetime. So delta E delta t is of the order of H line, their delta T is lifetime. Like say, if you have an isolated atom, we have heard of energy levels in hydrogen atom, minus Rydberg by n square. So those are levels of isolated atom. There the lifetime is infinite. But when you have another neighboring atom, there is a tendency of the electron in one atom to go over to another atom, which leads to a finite lifetime. And if there is a finite lifetime, then delta E cannot be equal to 0. It cannot be energy levels, it smears out into bands. That's how we look at the third uncertainty principle, del E del T is of the order of H line. The second one being del J Z del phi being of the order of H line. Now coming to this, so what is the philosophy behind it? It's nothing like the aspect of accuracy in the measurement of length or position. It's like in order to measure the position of a particle, you need light to be shown upon it. Now when light is shown upon it, the photon hits that particle with that momentum. So it is indeterminism. You cannot measure position with certainty, and the orders of uncertainty is this. And this can be related, this can be very well related with the Schrödinger's formalism of wave mechanics and Dirac's formalism. In fact, Dirac's wife, Wigner, so she used to tease Heisenberg that what kind of principle you have evolved, the very name is uncertainty. And then he said that no, I was also uncertain about my uncertainty principle, but only after your husband's work on my principle I became certain about my uncertainty principle. So very quickly now let us go into the hydrogen atom problem. See, three problems can be solved absolutely by quantum mechanics. One is the box problem, be it one dimensional, two dimensional, three dimensional, that is a particle separated by rigid walls. The second one is harmonic oscillator, and third one is hydrogen atom. Everything else we have to apply approximation methods. And you get what is known as quantum numbers. And the number of quantum numbers is exactly the same as the dimension of the problem. So it's a three-dimensional potential in the case of hydrogen atom, and you get three quantum numbers, n, l and m. N is called the principal quantum number, L is called the orbital quantum number, and M is called the azimuthal or the magnetic quantum number. Why magnetic, I am not going to explain here. Now the principal quantum number determines the energy, orbital determines the magnitude of angular momentum, basically L square, and M determines the Z component of angular momentum, not X and Y. I am not again going into that details, but let us see physically what they say. Now the principal quantum number determines the size of the orbit. Size remaining the same, its ellipticity, that is eccentricity may be different. So that is determined basically by L, and M determines its orientation in space. It cannot have 360-degree orientation in space. But then we find that one very significant quantum number is missing. Why? Because once you bring in relativity, the number of dimension is not 3. The time dimension gets added. One of the fundamental problem of special theory of relativity, as has been mentioned by Professor Mukherjee, in 1905 Einstein as a clerk as a patent clerk in Bern had published those phenomenal papers. Now electrodynamics of moving bodies, that was the first fundamental paper on special theory of relativity. So again, everything is not relative. Length is relative, time is relative, simultaneity is relative, mass is relative, but velocity of light is absolute. See, at that time there were popular limericks, like a moving rod becomes shorter. There was a young man named Mr. Frisk whose fencing was exceedingly brisk. Fast was his action that the Fitzgerald contraction reduced his rapier into a disc. Or there was a young lady named Miss Bright who could travel much faster than light. So she departed one day on the Einsteinian way and came back on the previous night. But all said and done, the velocity of light was absolute. And what was the problem in having time as a fourth dimension? See, everywhere you have to mention time, not only space. This particular, I will say colloquium rather than symposium, is being held in PhD Chamber of Commerce, but you have to say on 24th July at 10 a.m. If you just specify space, well, we don't know when to come. Even yesterday somebody shoot an email that whether it is 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. So time is such an important variable. When as a student you are answering the last question in your examination paper and the invigilator is saying that 2 minutes left, so you understand how important is time. The team you are supporting is trailing by a goal, and every time you'll be looking at the watch that whether your team can equalize or not. So time was so important. But why it could not be brought in? Because, well, time does not behave as space. In space you can go forward, you can go backward, you can go up, you can go down, but time draws us forcibly from past to future. And the dimensions are not same. If this is centimeter, this is second. So you need a translational factor, and that translational factor should be a velocity. Like if you say how long it takes from Madangari to or Saket to this place, say by metro 10 minutes, by auto 15 minutes. So every time you are talking about a space, but you are representing it by a time, keeping in mind some velocity. But what is that velocity which is independent of the notion of source and observer, which can make it a fundamental translational factor between space and time, and that was the velocity of light. So velocity of light, time as the fourth dimension. So fourth dimension, once we came into the domain of relativistic quantum mechanics, then there should be a fourth quantum number, and this fourth quantum number is missing. And here I show a small demonstration. See, if you throw the glass like this, it topples.
No, you have demonstrated well.
If you give a speed, the bottom remains at bottom, extreme is horizontal.
It's okay.
And the bottom remains at bottom and the top remains at top. So by giving a speed, you are giving an orbital stability. The same thing happens with the Earth, and the same thing happens with the orbital electron.
It had to break because there was no spin.
So that is the speed angular momentum. And according to Pauli, who came into the picture at a later stage, he says that the electrons behave very unsocially. That is, all the four quantum numbers cannot be same. That is called Pauli's exclusion principle. And then you have two forms of statistics that has also been spelled out by Professor Mukherjee. Now in classical case, you have to worry about the particle, because the particle becomes important. Like say in the Spain football team, Casillas is the goalkeeper, the captain, and Iniesta is the midfielder. Now if they exchange position, it makes a lot of difference. Iniesta in goal and Casillas in midfield. But an electron 1 in orbit 1 and electron 2 in orbit 2, and electron 2 in orbit 1 and electron 1 in orbit 2 doesn't make a difference. So they are indistinguishable. So those are quantum particles. In that case, the state is important, whereas in the previous case, the particle is important. And these were the two stalwarts, Fermi with Dirac and Professor Bosch with Einstein. Well, they evolved two kinds of statistics, fermions, that is electrons, quarks, etc. They have half integral spin which obey Pauli exclusion principle, and bosons, that's how the name Higgs boson comes, they do not obey Pauli exclusion principle. And this is Peter Higgs, and this I think Professor Mukherjee will explain the schematic diagram of Higgs boson's interaction with other particles. If very interesting analogy was given by Venkatji. So this is gist about the Gauss particle. It was named so by Leo Liederman, and for this particle, but for this particle there would have been only energy, particles flying at the speed of light, otherwise there would not have been any accumulation of mass. So we'll listen more about them from Professor Mukherjee, because he has given a very brief overview of the particles, and I'm definite that some relation with consciousness will definitely emerge, particularly with spirituality, because if Higgs boson is that binding cord for mass which gives mass to the particles, it is spirituality according to Indian mythology and even several other thoughts. I'm not talking about religion, religiousness, but spirituality. Spirituality is the cord which binds all of us. The Bible says that the light that cometh into the world lighted the universe. The Sufis call it Noor Ilahi, Noor-e Ilahi. The Sikh Gurus call it Ek Onkar, and in our Upanishads we have Vedahametam Purusham Mahantam Aditya Varanam Tamasha Parastat Tameva Viditva Timrittu Medhi Nanno Pantha Vidyate. So I hope that this will be able to get the spiritual cord. And an interesting pung, in fact, Professor Bush's house, it is in 22 Ishwar Mill Lane. Ishwar Mill Lane. I had gone there on 4th of February 1974, the day he passed away. And if you make the translation of Ishwar Mill Lane, of course here Ishwar was the name of a person, Mill his surname, and Lane, you know, Gali. And Professor Mukherjee will definitely understand, even Bimanda. Ishwar Mill Lane, if you translate in English, the God has been found. So the address of his house, Ishwar Mill Lane, is almost similar to saying that the God particle is found. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghosh.
Mike, please. Just one.